This is History Myths and Misconceptions, and today's misconception is Spartan Blood Soup. Spartan Blood Soup, or more precisely black broth, Melas Zomos, is a famous subject of many anecdotes that came down to us from antiquity. Quite a lot of people are trying to recreate this dish these days, and I will include their attempts into this video while I'm discussing the subject. The links are obviously in the description, so you can visit them and explore particular interpretations of the recipe, and maybe even cook it yourself, if pig blood is available at your local grocery store. Because yes, pig blood is one of the most important ingredients. What we're discussing today is the history of the dish, how authentic it really is, how edible it might have been, and most importantly, the stereotypes and misconceptions surrounding ancient Spartans and their lifestyle. So this black broth is mentioned in numerous ancient sources, and naturally, the vast majority of the sources were written many centuries after Sparta had essentially ceased to exist. For example, Plutarch is one of the most important sources on all things Spartan, but it is quite well known that his accounts of ancient Sparta are highly romanticized, full of anecdotes of debatable authenticity, and he lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries in the Roman Empire. So when you're reading something like Life of Lycurgus, that's one of the places where Plutarch mentions black broth, you have to understand that, first of all, Lycurgus is a legendary figure, and second, that there was approximately 1000 years between Lycurgus and Plutarch. And this is basically the problem with the majority of the sources in a nutshell. Probably the earliest account, when we're talking about this black broth thing, is the so-called Constitution of the Lacedaemonians, which is usually attributed to Xenophon, who lived in the 4th century BC. But we don't know for sure if Xenophon was the actual author. There's one anecdote in particular that travels from source to source, telling the story of a cook at the royal court, either in Syracuse or Pontus, depending on the author. The cook was asked to prepare the famous black broth. And then he said that the only way to truly appreciate this quite horrendous dish was to be an actual Spartan. The precise recipe of the black broth is unknown, but it is usually said that the primary ingredients were pork, blood, vinegar, and salt. Some accounts suggest it may have also included other components like herbs or vegetables. We don't know the exact proportions, so people attempting to recreate the recipe sometimes assume the blood soup was supposed to taste absolutely terrible, and they often get creative with vinegar to achieve the desired atrocious result. Was it really a staple of Spartan cuisine? Well, that's quite possible. But was it truly that atrocious and borderline inedible? That's debatable. It's more likely that the sources exaggerate things. More importantly, the Spartans themselves were known to exaggerate. There are clear indications that they liked to spread insane stereotypes about themselves. It is a bit like if you ask a French person about how many frogs they've eaten recently. The answer would probably be a bucket, topped with 10 croissants and a barrel of wine. What answer do you really expect? Or, depending on the context of the conversation, Russians like to mention that they are systematically being attacked by bears during their frequent trips to buy vodka. It has been noted many times that some stereotypes about Spartans clash with other bits of information. It seems that Spartans really liked to emphasize how ascetic they were, how militarized their society was, how tough they were, how straightforward and sometimes even stupid they were, but at the same time very noble, fitting into the noble savage trope. So the Spartans were supposedly a society of simple people, incapable of serious diplomacy or even naval warfare. Yet, some non-Doric states were eager to deflect from Athens and join Sparta. Spartans were also quite effective in borrowing money from Persians, and they were not only winning naval battles, but also they actually won the Peloponnesian War as a whole. Don't believe all the stereotypes. Now, regarding the black broth, are the stories about this infamous, barely edible dish believable, especially considering that the sources often recount wild anecdotes and the Spartans like to exaggerate and present themselves in ways that weren't entirely true? Well, let's try to be realistic here. Yes, we can be fairly sure that black broth existed, and the supposed crudeness of the dish shouldn't be that surprising. Even in the early 20th century, common folk in many places ate things that are perceived as quite repulsive by modern standards. For example, the traditional folk cuisine of Venice isn't carpaccio or cocktails like Bellini or Spritz. It's actually tripe. In China, there are restaurants that serve early 20th century street food, and people go there for the experience. These dishes, like pig lungs, are indeed quite unusual to modern palates. There were reasons people had to eat such things back then, and reasons why they don't eat them much today. The next point to consider is the perceived atrociousness of the dish, which largely stems from the fact that the Spartans used pig blood, an ingredient not particularly popular in the Western world. But it's not unheard of. Take, for instance, British black pudding. While the word pudding in Britain can refer to almost anything, including pastry, this one is an actual blood sausage. In fact, blood sausages are found all across Europe. Then you have Asia, Southeast Asia in particular, where blood is a fairly common ingredient, often used in the form of a jelly. Nobody sees anything strange or exotic about it there. Moreover, the Spartan black broth recipe is suspiciously similar to the Filipino dish called dineguan. It uses pork, salt, vinegar, and blood. Is it atrocious or inedible? No, it's not. Of course, you could make it inedible if you decided to dump an entire bottle of vinegar into the stew. But why would anyone do that? So yes, while we don't know exactly how widespread black broth was, it's quite possible that it was popular among certain people in Spartan society. And it probably wasn't that bad at all. Just cook it properly, be reasonable with the measurements, and maybe throw in some herbs. Take all these Spartan anecdotes with a grain of salt and a spoonful of vinegar. And now a little bit of shameless self-promotion. I have released a game called Oedipus/Antigone. It is a visual novel adaptation of the Theban cycle of Sophocles. The link to the Steam page is in the description. If you'd like to support this channel, now you know how. Thank you.